what was your favourite experience, or what was the most challenging experience you ever had?
Oh God, that's a tough question. That's a very tough question. Oh God, I'm going to have a think about that. I suppose in an orchestral setting, probably the most challenging thing I had to do was a symphony by Hans Werner Henze. This was part of a modern music festival about 10 years ago when I was on trial for a job in the symphony orchestra, so I would have been one of 5 people trying out for a job. And this was comfortably one of the most difficult pieces of music I'd ever played. And obviously every note that you play when you're on trial, because you're trying out for the job, everyone's listening to everything, has to be right. And I remember we played it in the Helix over in Ballymun, and I had 3 octaves of tuned gongs, and they must have run about 40 feet along the back of the stage. So they went from tiny little things of being about 5-6 inches to the big ones down the end, which were about 4 foot wide. And I had about 7 or 8 music stands set up all the way along them, and I had to run up and down these gongs and play tunes on them. So they were actually set up like a piano keyboard, black notes on the top, white notes on the bottom. So you nearly had to memorise the little tunes that you had to play in them, but you had to know exactly where you were. And then this music was a different time signature every bar, so it was pretty special, and it was an extraordinarily high level of pressure. But then that said, that level of pressure, I think if you are a musician, that's what you nearly thrive on. You have to enjoy that pressure. You have to actually enjoy the pressure of being terrified and playing something incredibly difficult, but knowing that you can just about do it. I think that's that feeling of succeeding in something like that is actually what you get into music for, generally speaking. So I suppose that would probably be the toughest thing. Thinking back on it, certainly that would have been the biggest challenge for me. But I haven't played anything quite as rough as that since. But it was great fun.
What's the actual build-up to actually just getting up on stage actually like?
Yeah, well, I suppose it depends over the course of it really depends what music you're playing, I suppose, and what type of a concert it is. So, say our general thing would be that we play about 44, 45 Friday night concerts in here in the National Concert Hall a year. This is sort of our home. The National Symphony Orchestra always play here on a Friday night. So generally speaking, what we would do is we'd rehearse, say, 10 to 3 or 4 on a Wednesday, rehearse again 10 to 3 or 4 on a Thursday. Friday morning we come in from 10 o'clock to 1, and generally speaking the idea with that Friday morning is that you just run the programme that you're going to play that night, and then on Friday night at 8 o'clock you play the programme. So I suppose Wednesday morning, that's it. You're expected to know exactly where you have to play. You're expected to absolutely know all your notes, know how the piece goes. But it does take a few days for a piece to actually come together properly. And different conductors will have different ideas over how a piece is played and what they think the composer wants. Just composing a piece is no guarantee that 3 different conductors won't have 3 totally different interpretations. It's quite interesting to play the same piece 3 or 4 times with different conductors. So sometimes a piece that you know really well can be quite hard when a conductor comes in and wants to do it totally differently, because everything you want to do is slightly changed. So I suppose Wednesday you're just really getting to know what the conductor wants. Thursday you're sort of fine-tuning those things, and then Friday morning it needs to be pretty much as it's going to be in the concert, and it's nice to get a run. Most conductors will run a piece on a Friday morning. Some don't. I much rather have that run, because at least you know what you're going to be feeling and know where. I mean, for me, at least I know where all my instruments are and where I have to run to at any particular time, which is actually more significant sometimes. If it's a big, like if it's a film concert, I could be playing cymbals 1 minute, I could be playing xylophone the next, I could be playing cymbals, tubular bells, anything. I could be running around the stage playing drum kit. So you need to know your choreography as much as anything else. And then I suppose, then we're on stage on Friday night. So certainly, I suppose the atmosphere is very, very different in a concert. And when you start playing, I suppose the first thing you notice in terms of the difference between rehearsals and performance is how quiet it is in a concert. Because there's always people moving or shuffling or writing things into their parts or talking or whatever going on in a rehearsal. And suddenly on a Friday night, there's just deathly silence. That does make it all very exciting, because suddenly you can hear every tiny little thing that's happening, and I suppose that's the big change. But definitely there's an enormous difference between your rehearsals and your sort of Friday night or your concert night, I should say, rather than Friday night. There's a huge difference between those two things.
So would you have had any close calls over the years?
I've had lots of close calls. I suppose the thing about being an orchestral musician is that people in the audience won't necessarily notice if something goes slightly wrong. Now, your colleagues around you will, because you've been playing the thing for 3 days, if you know what I mean. Nothing major, to be honest. No, of course. Everyone has little slips or forgets to come in or does something silly from time to time. But no, nothing horrendous. I suppose you're being an orchestral musician is more to do with you're actually sort of I'm trying to think of the word. You're really your colleagues are relying on you to do a good job, I suppose. So if you make a mess of something, you let your colleagues down more than the conductor. Conductors come and go, you might see some of them 3 or 4 times, you might see them 20 times, you might see them once, but it doesn't really matter. Your colleagues are there every week, week in, week out, every day you're working with them, so your responsibility is really to them to do a good job. So I suppose if something goes wrong, you feel bad for them more than for a conductor, but I think generally speaking, orchestral musicians are absolutely are their own worst critics. I think almost all orchestral musicians that I know are incredibly self-critical. You might go along to a concert and think an orchestra played brilliantly, but if you asked 10 individual players, I'd say all of them would probably say they didn't have a great concert or something went wrong or I was really annoyed with this and that. And I suppose that's just a part of being an orchestra or being a musician, is that if you ever play a perfect concert, you might as well give up, I don't know. It doesn't happen terribly often, but that said, that's just your own perception of what you've done. And I think everybody always strives to be slightly better than they are. That's kind of a musician thing, You always feel that you could do a little bit more, or to do something a little bit better, or maybe certain things just weren't quite right. But that's part of the joy of being a musician, I suppose. That's why it's interesting to play a piece 5 times and play it 5 different ways.
Do you think you'll continue in?
That's a tough question. I suppose so. I was very lucky. I started when I was still in college. I got a job in the National Symphony Orchestra. I was just finishing 4th year in college. So I suppose I was tremendously lucky, and I started at a very young age. I was only just 23. So will I keep going or not? Yeah, for the time being, yeah, I suppose so. But that said, I can see a time maybe when I might want to do something else or move into some other area of music, or I might get bored of it. I think if I ever felt that I was getting bored, or if I wasn't putting 100% of myself into it, I think I'd owe it to myself and my colleagues to try and do something else or try and find something else. But for the time being, I'm loving what I'm doing, I suppose. So that's a very roundabout answer to that question, isn't it? I'm happy for the time being anyway, I think. But certainly I do know musicians do get tired of doing what they're doing, and it is nice to have new challenges too, because I think particularly in an orchestral setting you tend to play a lot of the same pieces and you tend to do the same thing and have a routine, and it's nice to get out of that routine sometimes. But I'm happy enough for the time being, definitely.
Well, film music is basically the emotional core of a movie. It's what drives the drama and the action along. A good example would be watching a horror movie, say like Psycho, the shower sequence and that. If you watch that sequence with the sound turned down, it has no dramatic impact whatsoever. Yet, if you watch it with the sound full up, and that absolutely dramatic score by Bernard Herrmann just goes right through to your backbone. The amazing stabbing sounds, a completely string-led score. There's no other instrument used in that score. It was all strings, and it's an absolutely lethal example of how dramatic film music is in a movie.
Well, another example of good film scoring would be Bernard Herrmann again in North by Northwest. During the crop dusting sequence, it's a chase sequence where the plane's chasing Cary Grant, there's no music at all. Music only comes in with a sudden crash. The crop dusting plane crashes into the petrol tanker, and the music comes in with a vengeance, and it has an enormous impact when it does come in.
How would you describe the appeal of film music?
The passion for film music, to those who understand and appreciate film music, no explanation is necessary, and really for people who don't get it, no explanation is possible. You either get it or you don't get it. It's like bringing your friend to a movie and you turn around and you say, wow, listen to the score behind that. And they look at you as if you've got two heads and they say, what music? It's not a musical. They don't hear the dramatic music. They just think it's all part of the soundscape. So they actually don't get it. As someone once said about religion, to those who understand, no explanation is necessary. To those who don't, none is possible.
And there you have it. Among the passions and interests that are enduring today, film music and composing remains one of the most enduring in Ireland. You may not see it at first glance, but underneath the surface, the old loves and childhood passions are still growing and developing today, and will continue long into the future. Who knows where these passions will be in several years' time? All I know is that I now have a better understanding about my ongoing interest and about the ever-growing world of composing and music in Ireland. Thank you to everybody who took part, gave their time, and helped in this documentary. The speakers included were film score enthusiast Brian Saunders, organist and composer Josh Johnston, and orchestra percussionist Roger Moffat.